Hi, welcome to Speaking of Mysteries. I'm Bruce Southworth, the mystery reviewer for the Star Tribune, and my guest today is Anne Perry, the very prolific and very popular author of the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt series and the William Monk series, as well as many others. She has won an Edgar Award for one of her short stories, and the most recent Thomas Pitt novel is Southampton Row, published this year, March 2002, and the most recent William Monk novel, Funeral in Blue, was published in 2000. I want to thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
For those who aren't particularly familiar with Southampton Row, can you give kind of a brief overview of the plot?
Yes, there are two main elements to it. One is the political election, the general election of 1892, and you may or may not know that our system does not have a set term, but you must go to the country within 5 years, but you can go at any time of your own choosing. So the Prime Minister usually chooses the optimum time when he thinks he can win. But it also means that a government may not last as long as 5 years. And there were two real hot potatoes in this particular election. So nobody wanted to win and nobody wanted to lose. So it was quite an interesting issue because they knew that whoever won probably wouldn't last more than a couple of years. So the opposition was going to get in. And Pitt's arch enemy, Sir Charles Voysey from the previous story, is standing for Parliament. And he is standing as a Conservative, even though he's standing in a Liberal seat, and they're almost certain that the Liberal government will be returned. So if he's standing as a Conservative, that means he must know something that Pitt and his boss do not know, because he's not going to do it without a purpose, and almost certainly a purpose to his own advantage. So Pitt is asked to watch and listen and find out if he has any vulnerabilities, and the Liberal candidate, who's a new man, Aubrey Serocold, what are his vulnerabilities that Voysey will almost certainly use. So it's a watching, waiting brief to begin with. And then there is a murder. A spiritual medium, Maud Lamont, is found dead in her house one morning, and she had a séance the night before. And since she's obviously been dead all night, and the house was closed, it must have been somebody who was there that evening. And those people include the wife of Aubrey Serocold, who is very socialist, and I bring in some of the socialist issues and the Bloomsbury set and George Bernard Shaw and so forth, and Sidney Webb, Beatrice Webb, and some of the programs that they wish to put forward at that time. But that particular murder draws together the two sides of the conflict. And she's found killed in a rather disgusting fashion, and therefore it puts a spotlight upon the people who were there. Now, you go to a spiritual medium because if you're going seriously, not just as a little bit of fun at a party, and this was a very serious seance, there is something that you desperately need to know. Somebody who is dead knows something that you need. It could be about the afterlife, it could be about you, it could be about your family, it could be to do with money or power or scandal or any number of things which make you very, very vulnerable. Who was it whose secret Maud Lamont discovered? What was she using it for that she got herself murdered?
It's really very interesting the way you managed to pull those two sides together. They seem so disparate, the political side and that. One of the things I was curious about, since you involve a medium in this, how much of a stigma really was it for people at that time to go see one?
It's not a stigma if you're quite open about it and you don't have some office where people are going to think you're a bit strange. I don't think anybody minds what your religion is, broadly speaking. It's when you profess one thing and do something else that you have a problem. I don't know of any culture, any people, anywhere that can tolerate a hypocrite. And it's not that you've gone to the seance, it's what have you gone for? what is it that you think the dead know that you want to have told to you, but secretly? You're not prepared to look for it in the information in the normal way.
Mm-hmm.
Because normally if you want to know something about where did so-and-so hide the money, or what were these two people married, or what did they do, there are other ways of finding out. The fact that you've gone to a mystic, somebody who calls up, or believes they call up the dead, lays you wide open to being abused. And the suspicion that perhaps your secret must be kept secret for your own safety.
Mm. As you said, in this, Pitt is sort of assigned to look for the vulnerabilities in the political candidates, and then he's also assigned to investigate the murder. But
because Aubrey Serocole's great vulnerability is his wife's secret.
Absolutely. But at the beginning, he's, we should probably note that he's, excuse me, been assigned to the special branch.
Well, yes, he has this arch enemy who got him out of Bow Street in the previous story, and he got himself reinstated by solving quite brilliantly the murder in the previous one and turning the whole thing on its head, so it looked as if he'd won. But the inner circle, the secret society that I have created, it's imaginary, for the time, is very powerful. And he thinks he's back in Bow Street, but he's called in and said, I'm sorry, you were reinstated only to please the Queen. And because the last story actually finishes in Buckingham Palace. And it was only to please the Queen, and what she doesn't know isn't she can't fix. You are actually out again, and you're back in Special Branch, where he feels very much at odds because it's not his skill. He doesn't know about dynamiters and political agitators, anarchists, and so forth. He's learning.
Yep. In that context, I mean, between the time that he was going from Bow Street again and to Special Branch, there was a period where they were going to actually let him have a few weeks off, and the whole family was going to
because
to
the election was called quite suddenly.
Yeah.
And not having a fixed term, when the Prime Minister decides to dissolve Parliament and call an election, it's only a matter of, well, now it's about 3 weeks. Then it was only days. I mean, the dates I've given are the dates that seem to me to be accurate, except there was a misprint in counting early on in the story. But, I mean, the dates are accurate. And you go to the country immediately as soon as Parliament rises. And the whole shebang is over in a couple of weeks or less.
I was wondering if the fact that Charlotte and the family went off to Dartmoor, leaving Pitt in London on his own, was just kind of another, not a device really, but an aspect that you were using to emphasize sort of how he was out of water in a sense, both on the job side and with her gone,
Partly,
kind of lost.
But there are two good reasons. One is a sort of sensible reason that what kind of a hero leaves his family in a very vulnerable position when he knows that he's about to attack his enemy. I mean, you guard your rear, don't you? And his greatest weakness would be if something happened to his family, because they are close, he cares very much. But the other is a sort of technical plot thing that really there was nothing for Charlotte to do that Emily couldn't be doing. And I wanted to bring Emily back, and you can just have only so many women, or so many characters altogether. And I had got Emily and Isadora, the bishop's wife. And I really wanted to have quite a lot from Isadora's point of view. I wanted from Emily's point of view. I can't have 3 female points of view, it's too much. So if Charlotte is here, she will be doing something. The only way to make it reasonable is her not to be here. And there's Gracie also. So I had to get rid of both of them from the scene, otherwise you just got too many people.
A little too crowded.
Well, my agent's always saying, you know, condense. If a scene doesn't serve the purpose, get rid of it. If a character doesn't serve a purpose, try and blend them in so you're making one character out of 2. Don't disperse your energies by too many people, too many incidents, too many anything.
And it would certainly get confusing as far as
yes,
the readers,
it would.
from the readers'
But
point
I
of view.
really wanted to sort out this business with Isadora. I like
She was
her.
a fascinating character, absolutely.
Well, I think that many women might find themselves in similar positions. They won't all find a Cornwallis, but never mind.
It was in the Belgrave Square, I understand, that you introduced the Inner Circle.
Could have been.
Well, according to the research I did, that was the
I'm
book,
sure you're right.
1993. I was curious why you chose to come up with a group like that, and why inject it into the series. Was it to add a new dimension?
Yes, it was to add a new dimension, but also whatever it is that makes human beings join secret societies, I think is a very interesting and very frightening element of our character. we do like to be in the know, to feel that we have the power, that we know something other people do not know. And secret societies are one of my pet hates, because I think by nature they're dangerous, because when you don't know what people are doing, you don't know what alliances are, you don't know who is your friend or your enemy, because they may appear to perhaps to be powerless, but they have very great power, really. And you don't know whether the tail's wagging the dog or the dog's wagging the tail. And we have had secret societies in most highly civilized cultures that I know of. I'm not bashing men, but it does seem to be a male thing. Perhaps it's because men have the power. Certainly secret societies within the church would have to be male, because there aren't any women in power. There haven't been women in political power or financial power. Or it could be, on the other hand, that we have lots of secret societies, but we're so darn clever at it, they're still secret. But I doubt it.
But we may never know.
You can't keep secrets that well.
Yeah. I did find it interesting that through the course of the book, Pitt was even questioning whether or not the postman would be a member of this, because he was really unsure at a certain point who he could talk to, who he could trust. Yes. It was very interesting.
And he was.
What, kind of shifting gears a little bit, what do you find is the sort of the greatest challenge in writing a series, continuing a series, either in the case of the Pitt novels or the Monk novels?
I think always the greatest challenge in writing a book at all, and I don't think it changes from series to a one-off, is to make your plot so tight, so compulsive, that there's never a point that the reader is aware of the writer getting somebody somewhere to suit the plot, so that you feel that everybody had to do whatever it was they did. Being who they were, this is what they would have done, and there was no reasonable choice at which point they would have taken an easier or a less dangerous course. So at the end you say, of course not. What? I want my reader to feel at the end, I understand this. This is human passion, human life. This is why people do things. I believe it. Not, well, it was quite an interesting mystery and it had me puzzled, but not real.
How do you manage to transition new readers? Say if they started with Southampton, they may not be familiar with a lot of the characters. It must be very difficult to kind of blend that in so that they...
Well, I would like to do it as briefly as possible. You don't want a recap of all past stories. Usually if you say the relationship, or that they have known each other for years, or loved or hated or been afraid of or whatever for a long time, you don't need to give the reasons. People don't want a lot of clutter if it's moving along fairly smoothly, and if it isn't, then you'd better throw it out and start over anyway.
Well, I thought that you handled the sort of the summation, kind of dropping hints throughout to for people who hadn't read the last book to understand why Voysey was so angry with Pitt and all those things that happened.
Thank you.
That was very well done.
I tried hard to do it without giving you a recap of previous stories, and if you wanted to go back, not spoiling it for you, but making enough sense so that this present story hangs together. But thank you very much. I'll try to live up to it now.
Another thing I'm kind of curious about in the Monk series, the relationship between William Monk and Hester Latterly has developed and grown, and now you have them married off.
Why do you say married off?
Married! I don't quite mean it that way.
I know.
But I'm kind of, as the characters have been so independent for so long and the tension's been there for so long, how did you approach that point of actually getting them married?
With great trepidation. But I realized, as my editor of the time pointed out to me, that the readers lose patience. We all lose patience with people who dither. If there's anything drives me frantic, it's ditherers. My stepfather used to say to me, make something, even if it's only a mistake, but just get on with it. And as long as the tension was great and there were real, understandable reasons why they could not get together, it's believable. But you stretch it as far as you can, then there comes a point when it becomes a device. Have you watched the television sort of series where perfectly well the minute the hero falls in love with somebody, she's for it. Either she's a villainess or she's going to get killed, because it's not going to end happily. And it becomes predictable, and it becomes a device that's, you can see it 100 yards off.
Has the reception been good from the fans?
Yes. I've had one or two people who said, I wanted it to be Oliver. But almost everybody who's expressed an opinion has said, I'm so glad you married them at last. Because decent people with any integrity, any drive, any emotion don't dither. They might make a wrong judgment, But they do eventually do something. I don't know any woman who's got a patience with a man who doesn't eventually make a decision. And it has to be the man who makes a decision in this particular case.
In this particular case, yeah, and it did go on for quite a long time.
Yes,
so
and if you don't want me enough to ask, for Pete's sake, I don't want you either.
I think I'll go talk to this barrister over here for a little bit.
Yes.
Did you have any particular models in mind when you initially created the character of Monk or Pitt, for that matter, or the various women?
The only model I've had in mind was Monk. It sounds ridiculous, but I dreamt one night that I shared a house with this man, and the house was completely divided, so there were two quite separate establishments. Nothing was in common, but we sort of met in the middle and quarrelled every time we met, but I knew he wouldn't actually hurt me. And I woke up with a strong sense of a sort of character that would be fun to write about. And it's about the only time an idea that I dreamt or that came to me in the middle of the night is any good. I've given up jotting down my ideas in the middle of the night because they're absolute rubbish.
Good, I'm glad you found that to be the case, because I haven't jotted down any ideas at all in the middle of the night.
Well, I did once or twice. I thought, this is brilliant. I woke up and I thought, absolute tripe.
I had read also, somewhere along the line, that you've kind of credited your father with pushing you toward writing. How in a way did he encourage
Father,
that?
stepfather, and mother all did. My father encouraged me by giving me a very small allowance every month so that I could actually afford to. It amounts to present day about $130 in a rate of exchange, but it'll probably be worth quite a bit more than that. Because like a lot of other writers, it took me years to get published. And then the first 10 years I was published, it was barely enough to live on. And that's living very, very carefully. My mother and stepfather have always just encouraged me by saying, you know, keep going, we believe in you, keep going. And I think that's what people, friends, family, whatever, of writers just have to do.
The kind of moral support is invaluable, really.
Yes, because you get a lot of dark days. And my stepfather used to hide the returned manuscript. When can we give it to her? When can we give it to her?
In a good moment, if there is one, right?
Yes, well, you have to know sometime. But there are better moments and worse ones.
Kind of changing gears again, how do you plan a novel? I mean, do you have a germ of an idea that you run with, or how does it happen?
Usually it comes from the motive. Why would anybody feel that this was their only way of dealing with a problem? And it has to be so strong that a reasonably intelligent person could not find a better answer. Otherwise it falls down. I don't like the motive, Ole was mad. I don't find that satisfying. Just money I don't find very satisfying. This person's greedy, they want something they haven't got, they've got to kill somebody to get it. It doesn't leave any sense of satisfaction of having been fed inside with the reader. It doesn't with me anyway. I like to have some social problem, some emotional, ethical problem that tears people in two different directions. I would like to have both a social and an ethical problem that somehow come together and cause a third problem that's bigger than either of them. And somebody caught in the middle where they feel that they have no other way of getting out of the problem than violence.
I get the sense that in a way you start from the end of the book.
Oh yes, always.
And then come forward. Now, do you...
Well, you go two ways with a crime story. You have the crime, and you have all the backstory which brought you up to this particular position, which is what the detective will be uncovering as he goes along. And then you have what happens as a result of his detection, which could be further crime, and it will be the unmasking of different people's characters. It will be the shredding of things until you have unravelled all the backstory. So in a sense you start at the end, and then you start at the beginning of a new series of actions.
So do you outline all of this then to keep it straight?
I do, yes.
Yeah?
I believe there are people who can write, and write very well, without outlining, but I certainly could not. I have, chapter 1, scene 1, where we are, when we are, who's present and what's to happen, scene 2, etc., right through to the end of the book. That's not obligatory, it's just the only way I can work, and have it have some shape, some form, some pace to it that seems to me to be right.
As I recall from, it was a long time ago that we did an interview, but it seems to me I remember that you, at least at that time, wrote everything out longhand.
I do, yes.
Do you still do that?
I still do, yes.
And then someone transcribes it into the computer?
I can only think with a pen in my hand.
That's very interesting. It's almost like you're rejecting that current technology. Not rejecting it, but kind of like back in the...
I'm a reasonably good touch typist. I just don't like to think on a machine. It's also not nearly so comfortable. I mean, physically comfortable. You've got to sit up and with your shoulders forward and look at the screen and do this. It's much easier to get a nice lazy boy and lean back and put a pillow on your lap and write like that. I like writing.
Mm-hmm.
I like writing manuscript.
The action.
Yes.
Yeah, the sense of it. What's a day like for you that is a complete day off? What would you do?
Don't know. Never had one. I don't work on Sundays because, as you probably know, I'm LDS Mormon. And so I go to church, but I mean, I teach class in church and so forth. And then in the afternoon, I will visit with somebody, talk, walk, whatever. But that's not a day off in the sense that we don't get out of church till about 1. So it's 2 by the time I get home. But it's not a day off in the what would you do? Because Sundays are reasonably prescribed until the middle of the afternoon, and then I do whatever I would like to do, visit, go out for a drive in the country, with family, friends, whatever, talk. But a whole day off, I enjoy writing. It's a discipline for me not to think work on a Sunday, except when I'm on the road, of course, in which case you work every day.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. Finding something that you would choose to do on your day off that you love that much. I think that's terrific.
Isn't it lovely to be paid for doing what you want to do anyway?
Absolutely, absolutely. I wanted to ask you about kind of the difference between the following you have here in the United States and the following that you have in England. And as I understand it, the following here is much greater.
Oh, very, very much greater. I know in monetary terms it's about 12 times the size. Also, Americans are very generous of spirit. You do have good bookshops, you have events, you get to meet readers, but Americans tend to tell you if they like something, and that is the greatest reward of all. On this particular tour, I've had people of 2 minority groups, which I'd prefer not to name, who have come to me and said they appreciate how I've handled the point of view of that particular minority. Now that's a reward you can't buy. And I have people say sometimes if they've been through a hard time for health or anxiety or family troubles or whatever, and say, I read all your books, and it got me through that time. That, I think, is so generous of spirit that they will come and tell me that, and it's a reward that, it is the ultimate reward for a writer. I mean, it's very nice to have good criticisms, I mean, in the newspaper and so forth. It's obviously we all need to eat, so it's very nice to be paid, and it's nice to be paid a little beyond what you need for subsistence, or even a lot beyond it. But the taxman can take it, or you can lose it, or waste it, or whatever. You can never be robbed of somebody saying, I read what you wrote, and it mattered to me. I felt better for it. I felt wiser, or braver, or whatever. Even the taxman can't take that from you.
Well, that's definitely good. Definitely good. You have a new book out, or not quite out, I guess, that it's going to be published soon. It's set in the French Revolution. Now, is this going to turn out to be a series? It's called One Thing More?
It was published some time ago in Britain, and before that in Germany, and I'm happy to say the French have taken it. I don't have an American publisher for it yet. But at some future time, if I should do, I find the period absolutely fascinating, and I would love to do more. But America is 3/5 of my income, even though I'm published in 10 different languages, including English. And I care very much, apart from financial reasons, what my American public thinks and feels. I can't afford to spend half a year on something that is not going to be acceptable here. But I would love to go back to that period. Nobody ever created fictional characters more dramatic, bizarre, passionate, vulnerable than those of the real people of the French Revolution. So the answer is yes, if my American publisher will take it. If not, when I can get to the stage that I can afford to write one that doesn't sell.
So that would mean that if you did go off in that direction, you'd be actually working on essentially 4 series at the time. The Thomas and Charlotte Pitts and the Monks, and the allegorical fantasy that you wrote.
Well, that is kind of complete, because the sequel to that is done.
The sequel is done, so it's not kind of an ongoing thing. It was just a...
Well, the sequel ends with the destruction of the earth and the resurrection of it. There really isn't anything to say after that I know of. I mean, I'm sure there is more, but I can't even begin to imagine that. But I have just signed the contract to do a totally new series of 5 books complete, set in World War I.
Really?
And I am so excited about that. We go for another hour and forget about anything else. And the first one of those, I have to have finished by July of 2002, the first draft anyway, to be published probably in the fall of 2003.
Well, that'll be very exciting.
I'm so excited about it, I can hardly stand it. It'll be 5 separate books, each one with their own mystery, but an overarching superplot of all of them. And it begins on the backs in Cambridge with a cricket match on June the 28th, which, as you will know, is the day of the shot that rang around the world, killed the Archduke and Duchess in Sarajevo, and goes to the start of the First World War. The second one is 1915, in the trenches in Ypres, first gas attack. The third one is 1916, and that has to do with the home front and the naval battles, Jutland, etc. The fourth one is 1917, touches a little on the Russian Revolution and the mutiny of the French army, and that is to do with shooting one's own men, not the French, British, and has a court-martial and a nice aerial battle. And the last one finishes when my hero, who's modelled on my own grandfather, who was a chaplain in the trenches in the First World War, when he returns and we get the last shots fired on the 11th of November 1918, and then silence, and Europe has lost 10 million men.
Unbelievable.
And then there's a cheer that goes up right from the mountains to the sea.
Is this, for all of the research that you've done into the Victorian era, and I know you've told me before that you have quite a large collection of material on that, is this going to be...
I've now got twice as much because I've included World War One.
Okay. I was kind of wondering if you were how much
an
new
enormous
that was.
amount. It's completely new, really, because the war is something quite different. And I want to see, through my different characters, what it's like for the men in the trenches, for the commanders, for the sappers, for the supply people, for the voluntary aid dispensers, the women who drove ambulances and so forth. Many fine Americans came over voluntarily, own expense, risked their lives. For the surgeons, for the aerial combat people in the Royal Flying Corps, for the naval officers at sea, for the scientific people, and for the women on the home front.
That's quite a lot of ground to cover.
Sure, but what's the point in trying to do something that you know you can accomplish? You want to stretch yourself for something that's you think you can, but it's just going to take everything you've got.
Definitely. I wanted to mention that you now have a website, which I guess is a fairly recent thing.
Fairly recent, yes. A year or so?
And it's AnnPerry.net, your name,
Yes.
one word, okay. We'll put that in the credits.
You could also put in the credits that to write to me, and I'm happy to reply to people, Tyrnvawr, which is my house name, Tyrnvawr, one word, at AOL.com.
Oh, great.
So that's where, if anybody cares to write to me, I'll write back.
Wonderful. I want to thank you very, very much. It's been delightful to see you again, do a second interview, and I hope we'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.